Bantamweight's in search of a big-time win. Coming up this weekend, we have Topology's 96th ranked bantamweight taking on the number 105 man. It's Johnny Munoz Jr. Kid Kvenbo taking on Liudvik Sholinian, and I can't really pronounce his nickname, and I do pride myself on pronunciation, so Palmeyros. And if you do consider it for Sholinian, he came into the UFC off of the Ultimate Fighter. He was one of the favorites to win the season. He ends up losing to eventual champion Ricky Tercios. Tercios actually threw volume that landed in that fight and outlanded Liudvik Sholinian. So they bring in Sholinian, just, you know, they kind of keep him in waiting, keep him in flux, and he ends up in on short notice taking on Jack Shore.
Tough guy to fight on short notice.
Hard to look all that good in that matchup. So if we do switch gears and we focus on Kid Kvenbo, I mean, listen, that guy's a grappler. The nickname, it was his dad's nickname. His dad's name, Johnny Munoz. Like, even in the movie The Big Lebowski, they called him the dude. So he didn't get confused with anybody else. But, of course, the Nihilists and everybody else, they confused him with Jeffrey Lebowski. And then all of a sudden, you got a guy peeing on your rug. And you're listening to...
I've never watched the movie.
You've never watched that movie?
Ever.
You've never lived. But the point of the matter is, you pick a nickname to, you know, completely differentiate yourself from anybody that has the same name. But he has his dad's nickname. He has his dad's name. You think that they exchange shirts, too?
It'd be weird if they did.
It would be, but his dad and his family did give him his black belt. And Johnny Munoz Jr. is a very, very accredited jiu-jitsu player. No-gi champion. He's an SJIF champ in 2016. Former King of the Cage bantamweight champion as well for Johnny Munoz Jr. And he was undefeated before he came into the UFC. He took on a tricky guy, Nate Maness. A lot of people thought that Munoz had won that fight against Maness. It was his takedowns versus the limited striking that we saw out of Maness in that one. Maness also on this card. Munoz goes out and fights Jamie Simmons, and you think, hey, Jamie Simmons is a good wrestler. He's going to take him down. Munoz landed some of the worst volume I've ever seen in my life.
It was bad.
Like, none of those punches hit his face. And if you want the exact number, Johnny Munoz landed 11 of 56 significant strikes in the first round of that fight.
This is my problem with Johnny Munoz Jr. He's like a straight-A student who can't stop fucking up outside of school. Like, I don't know what movie it's from, but have you ever seen that clip where Morgan Freeman's like, "You're smoking crack, aren't you?" And he's like got tears in his eyes and he's crying. And that kid's like, "Yeah, I've been smoking crack." That's what I look at when I look at Johnny Munoz Jr.
You're watching those movies, but not The Big Lebowski?
Hear me out. Johnny Munoz has all the tools. He's like that kid from the rich part of town. You think he's doing well in school, he's good at sports, but you're like, damn, he got arrested? Like, really? That's the rumor around school. Because Johnny Munoz has all the skills. You bring it up. He is great on the mat with his jiu-jitsu. He has good striking. In theory, but the thing is about Munoz, it is one of those I'll believe it once you show it to me. And to be fair, we said the same thing about Tresean Gore leading up to last weekend's card. And hey, I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again in the future. Gore was able to prove to us that he does have the potential. Maybe not the highest potential in the world, but there's still a good MMA fighter hidden in there somewhere. For Johnny Munoz Jr., I hate to always bring up Gilbert Burns, but he is one of the most obvious examples of, hey, you're a good striker, you're a good wrestler, you're a great grappler. Why the heck can't you put it all together? For Munoz, he has always left you wanting more, and that's the problem. When you're 1-2 in the UFC, it's not a great look. And then when you look at his one win, you're right, Jamie Simmons in theory is supposed to be a good wrestler. But there's a lot of other fighters out there that if we didn't give them the benefit of the doubt of a guy like Johnny Munoz, who again has all the tools, we'd look at that 1-2 with the one, let's just be honest, somewhat suspect win over a guy who isn't the highest caliber in the world. And we would not look at Kid Kvenbo and be like, hey, this is a guy who has a high ceiling. But I'll sit here right now and say, I do think Johnny Munoz is one of those guys like a pitcher who's in AAA until they're 30 and then they do that one kind of minor technical adjustment and then they're able to make it to the big leagues. I really do feel like once Johnny Munoz Jr. is able to get over whatever mental hurdle he has to put his whole game plan together, I still think there is a good fighter there.
I don't even think there's a mental hurdle. The fight against Nate Maness, he replaced Ray Borg on a couple of days' notice.
That's true.
I thought he beat Nate Maness. He goes in and takes on Jamie Simmons. Simmons is a good wrestler, wrestled in college. Munoz goes in. They're not double legs. It's just he wraps his hands as he's running the pipe around, like, above his waist. Got both of his takedowns. Got one at the end of the first round. Gets it at the second round. Gets into the rear naked choke, and it's easy. It's done. And then he's taking on a guy in Tony Gravely, and he's doing well. I mean, as short as it was, he gets pushed up against the cage, goes deep down for the double leg, and as he does, Gravely lands an uppercut. They meet both ways, and Munoz ends up getting finished. And I thought Munoz was going to have a lot more success in that matchup, considering how good Gravely is as a wrestler, how good at jiu-jitsu Munoz is. That was going to be a fun fight. Well, if you expected a lot out of that, and you expected a lot out of Jamie Simmons, we throw it on back to Liudvik Sholinian, the second part of this fight, because he was on the Ukrainian national wrestling team, and that's exactly where his base is found. And if you consider it for Sholinian, he fought a really good level of competition coming up through, and we know him for that loss to Ricky Tercios, who ended up winning the season. He fights Mitch Raposo on The Ultimate Fighter. Going back and watching that fight today, it was a little weird because Raposo won the first round and you just had Sholinian kind of chasing him and not really landing much. And then in the second round, he works his takedown. So then they have a sudden death. Third round, and Sholinian's able to take him down a little bit more. It was a close third round. I thought it could have gone either way, but Sholinian gets the win there. Has a win over Yuma Horiuchi. That was a really good one in 2019. And also had the fight in Bellator 209 against a former CFFC champ, Sidmar Anadio, and also a split decision win over Vince Cachero for what it's worth. Cachero ended up in the UFC. So you look at it for Sholinian, takes that fight against Jack Shore on short notice. He was replacing Zviad Lazarishvili on a couple of weeks' notice, loses that one 3 times 30-27 on the judges' scorecards. He was booked against Nathaniel Wood back earlier on this year, which feels like an odd one because Wood's very good at featherweight.
I think it's fair to say that would have been a tough fight for him.
Yeah. I mean, Shore and Wood.
Nathaniel Wood's pretty good.
But you look at this matchup, Matt, I think both guys can kind of meet in the center because for Sholinian, he does a really good job of trying to cut the cage. Oh, wait, no, he doesn't. He kind of chases opponents, has good takedowns, but doesn't really do much with them once he gets in top position. So it is an interesting matchup, all things considered. But I don't know. I mean, he's got a pretty damn good Instagram game. He's got like 22,000 followers, so that's kind of good. Trains with some really good fighters, in the Vegas area, if you do consider it that way too. I have a little bit of a hard time here, but Sholinian, for being a prospect, for being 9-2-1 at 32 years of age, it is a tricky one for him taking on Johnny Munoz Jr. because Sholinian, by and large, low volume when it comes to his striking. Johnny Munoz, crank that volume button, pull it right out, but he doesn't even have the accuracy of like a Caitlin Chukagian in some of these fights.
The weird thing about this fight, though, is I think Munoz has the advantage in pure grappling. We all know how good his submissions are, especially if he gets in the top position. He might have the advantage on the feet, but Sholinian is the better wrestler. Like, he has the ability to pick what poison he wants to go after, so maybe Sholinian in that top position can have some success. Again, it's tough to be a good grappler off your back. You could be Fabricio Verdum, you could be Brian Ortega, you can be Charles Oliveira. It's tough to get submissions at the UFC level off of your back against really good MMA fighters who have the benefit of being able to strike you in the head. Like, yes, guys like Gordon Ryan look really impressive when they're doing all this in jiu-jitsu tournaments, but people in jiu-jitsu tournaments don't have to worry about the strikes coming towards them. The thing that MMA grapplers have to worry about are strikes coming towards them. So I do think Munoz can have success on the bottom, even though Sholinian's best path to victory is probably going to be using his offensive wrestling, just so at least he can fight the fight under whatever terms he wants to. But I'll be honest, you've almost talked me more into a Johnny Munoz Jr. pick. I brought up some red flags. You've cut down a couple of them, if I'm being honest. Again, I do worry about the pace and the wrestling of a guy like Sholinian, but I think if Munoz can throw enough volume to at least make Sholinian uncomfortable on the feet, I think if that does open up some of the grappling exchanges, I will start to favor Johnny Munoz Jr.
Gyms for Jim's sake for Sholinian. You look at some of the pictures, he's out there with Mitch Raposo, who he fought him at one point. He's out there with Tony Ferguson. He's out there with Merab Dvalishvili. For Johnny Munoz Jr., a lot of time it's Sequence BJJ's dad's gym, as well as Entram Gym in Tijuana. You've seen a strong connection with Brandon Moreno, and I know Moreno trains primarily now out of Glory MMA and Fitness, but still a lot of great fighters to train your striking with there in Mexico. You look at the odds in the matchup. Munoz minus 200 hasn't really changed. Sholinian open plus 175, still about there. We have a look at the Tapology votes, Matt. Surprised to us as they are to you. I'm going to say over under 67.5% for Johnny Munoz Jr.
I think they're going to be close, but I will say over. Just because where the odds are, you might assume it's in like the 80%, but I think it'll be close because he has been underwhelming in the UFC.
Gonna say the dude is over, and it's just under. 513 total votes, 65% Munoz, 79% by decision for the 35% that have Sholinian 83% by decision. So most people seeing this one going the way of a decision. For Sholinian, got kind of taken down, held down a lot in his last fight against Jack Shore, who is floating around the rankings. So a really tough fight. For Munoz Jr., kind of getting to pick up the pieces. I thought he beat Manus. He definitely won his next fight, and he had a really tricky one his last time out when he was taking on Tony Gravely. And that fight that he had against Gravely was back in June. So it's been about 5 months since he fought Tony Gravely and got finished in that one. You're making a total pick on this one. I find this one tricky. Minus 200 on Munoz feels a little bit rich for my blood, but I'm going to take it in this one.
I do like Munoz in this fight, but again, this is one of those fights where it's a, hey, prove to me what you really are made of. Because again, I thought this is a fighter who was going to be on the borderline of the top 15 very soon into his UFC career, if not become a ranked fighter very early into his UFC career. So I do like Munoz in this fight, but I think we're both going to get a better idea as to really where both fighters, I guess, are going to sit in the division. Because if Sholinian is able to get the win over a guy like Munoz Jr., who again, we both think is a very skilled fighter, it's just a matter of putting it all together, Sholinian is going to really boost himself up the rankings. So I think this is going to be an entertaining fight. I think it's a skilled fight for how low down on the card it is, but I also have Munoz Jr.
Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in the matchup. Both of us going with Kid Kvenbo to get the win over Liudvik Sholinian. Big time fights left on this card. Magny taking on Rodriguez. Rodriguez taking on Lemos. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.